A vast, frozen wilderness near Lake Anjikuni, Canada. November 1930. The landscape is stark and desolate, with snow-covered trees and a heavy gray sky. The wind howls, cutting through the silence like a knife. Joe Labelle, a rugged fur trapper in his mid-40s, trudges through the deep snow. His breath forms clouds in the freezing air, and his face is weathered from years of living in the harsh northern wilderness. He's been on the trail for days, his supplies dwindling, and his body aching from the cold. His only solace is the thought of reaching the Inuit village near Lake Anjikuni, a place he's visited many times before. The villagers have always welcomed him with warmth, sharing food and shelter. As Joe approaches the village, he notices something unusual. The usual signs of life, smoke rising from the huts, the sound of children playing, the barking of sled dogs, are absent. The village is eerily silent. He stops in his tracks, his instincts tingling. Something feels wrong. Close-up of Joe's face, his eyes narrowing as he scans the empty village. Joe calls out, his voice echoing through the stillness. "Hello? Is anyone here?" No response. Only the sound of the wind. He steps closer to the nearest hut, his boots crunching in the snow. The door creaks as he pushes it open. Inside, the fire has long gone out, but a pot of stew still hangs over the ashes, frozen solid. Personal belongings, clothes, tools, and hunting gear are scattered around, as if the occupants left in a hurry. Joe steps back outside, his breath quickening. He walks through the village, calling out again and again, but there's no reply. The silence is unnerving. He notices the sled dogs tied up near the huts, their bodies stiff and lifeless, buried under a thin layer of snow. They've been dead for days. Joe's mind races. Where could everyone have gone? Why would they leave their food, their dogs, their belongings? He looks around, searching for footprints or any sign of a struggle, but the snow is undisturbed. It's as if the entire village simply vanished into thin air. Joe stands in the middle of the village, his heart pounding. He's seen many strange things in his years as a trapper, but nothing like this. The thought crosses his mind. What could have made an entire village disappear overnight? Fade to black as Joe looks up at the gray sky, his face a mask of fear and disbelief. The screen reads, "Based on the legend of the Anjikuni Lake Disappearance, the Inuit village near Lake Anjikuni." The camera slowly pans across the snow-covered huts, their doors creaking in the wind. The silence is deafening, broken only by the crunch of Joe's boots in the snow. Joe Labelle steps further into the village, his senses on high alert. The eerie stillness is overwhelming. He approaches the largest hut, the one where the village elder, Kala, used to live. The door is slightly ajar, swaying gently in the wind. He pushes it open, the hinges groaning as if protesting his intrusion. A wooden table is set with bowls and utensils, as if a meal was about to be served. A half-carved piece of bone lies on the floor, the knife still beside it. A child's fur mitten is tucked under the table, forgotten. The fire pit in the center of the room is cold, the ashes long since settled. He moves to the next hut, and the next, each one telling the same story. Abandoned meals, unfinished tasks, and personal belongings left behind. In one hut, he finds a cradle, its blankets neatly folded, but no child in sight. In another, a pair of snowshoes leans against the wall, as if waiting for their owner to return. The sled dogs, still tied to their posts, are frozen solid, their bodies stiff and lifeless. Joe kneels beside one of the dogs, brushing the snow off its fur. "What happened to you?" he whispers, his voice trembling. Joe's mind races. He's seen villages abandoned before, but never like this. There's no sign of a struggle, no tracks in the snow, no indication of where the villagers might have gone. It's as if they vanished into thin air. He walks to the edge of the village where the cemetery lies. The graves, once neatly marked with stones, are now disturbed. The snow around them is trampled, and the graves themselves are empty. Joe stares at the open graves, his heart pounding. "Who would do this?" he mutters, his voice barely audible. He knows he can't solve this mystery alone. He needs help. With one last look at the abandoned village, Joe turns and begins the long trek back to the nearest outpost to report what he's found. The edge of the village, where the small cemetery lies. The snow is thick, and the air is heavy with silence. The graves, once marked with simple wooden crosses and stones, are now disturbed. The camera slowly pans across the scene, revealing the eerie emptiness. If you enjoyed this video, here's a quick task for you. Hit that subscribe button and don't forget to tap the bell icon next to it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Joe Labelle stands at the edge of the cemetery, his breath visible in the cold air. His eyes widen as he takes in the sight before him. The graves are open, their contents gone. The snow around them is trampled, as if someone, or something, had been digging frantically. The wooden crosses lie broken and scattered, half buried in the snow. He steps closer to the nearest grave, kneeling down to examine it. The hole is deep, the edges jagged and uneven. There's no sign of the body that should be there, no bones, no clothing, nothing. Just an empty pit filled with snow. Joe moves to the next grave and the next, each one telling the same story. The graves are empty, their occupants missing. He pauses at a smaller grave, likely that of a child. The wooden cross is still intact, but the name carved into it is barely visible under a layer of frost. He runs his fingers over the letters, his heart heavy with unease. Flashback to a happier time. Joe sitting by a fire in the village, sharing a meal with the villagers. Children laugh and play in the background, and the elder, Kala, tells stories of the land and its spirits. The warmth of the memory contrasts sharply with the cold, desolate present. Cut back to the cemetery. Joe stands up, his face pale. He looks around, as if expecting to see someone or something watching him. The wind picks up, howling through the trees and carrying with it a faint, almost human-like whisper. Close up of Joe's eyes, wide with fear. "Who would do this?" he says aloud, his voice trembling. "And why?" He takes a step back, his boots crunching in the snow. The silence of the village feels oppressive now, as if the land itself is holding its breath. He glances at the open graves one last time, then turns and begins to walk away, his pace quickening. What happened at Anjikuni Lake? The vast, snow-covered wilderness surrounding the abandoned village. Joe Labelle, now deeply unsettled by what he's discovered, begins a frantic search for clues. The camera follows him as he moves through the village and its outskirts, his breath visible in the freezing air. Joe stands in the center of the village, his mind racing. He knows he can't leave without trying to understand what happened. Determined, he begins a methodical search, starting with the huts he hasn't yet explored. Inside one of the huts, Joe finds a hunting rifle leaning against the wall, fully loaded. He picks it up, checking the chamber. Why would they leave this behind? He mutters to himself. In another hut, he discovers a pile of furs neatly stacked, as if someone had been preparing for a long journey. But there are no tracks leading away from the village, no signs of movement in the snow. Joe decides to expand his search beyond the village. He walks toward the lake, his boots crunching in the snow. As he approaches the shore, he notices something unusual, a set of faint marks in the ice, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. He follows the marks, which lead toward the center of the lake. The ice is thick, but Joe treads carefully, his heart pounding. About halfway across, he finds something that makes his blood run cold, a hole in the ice, roughly circular and large enough for a person to fit through. The edges are jagged, as if something had burst through from below. He looks around, searching for any other clues, but the snow is undisturbed. Whatever made the hole and the marks is gone, leaving no trace. Cut to Joe returning to the village, his pace quickening. He's visibly shaken, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Back in the village, Joe decides to check one last place, the storage pit where the villagers kept their food. He digs through the snow, uncovering the pit's wooden cover. When he opens it, he finds it nearly full of dried fish and meat, enough to last the village through the winter. Joe looks up, his eyes scanning the gray clouds. For a moment, he thinks he sees a flicker of light, but it's gone before he can be sure. What happened here? Nightfall at the abandoned village. The sky is a deep, inky black, dotted with stars. The wind has died down, leaving an eerie stillness. Joe Labelle sits by a small fire he's built outside one of the huts, his rifle resting across his knees. He's exhausted but too unsettled to sleep. Joe stares into the flames, his mind replaying the day's discoveries, the empty huts, the disturbed graves, the strange marks on the ice. He shakes his head, trying to make sense of it all. Suddenly, a faint glow catches his eye. He looks up, scanning the horizon. "What the hell is that?" he mutters. He stands up, his rifle in hand, and steps away from the fire for a better view. The light grows brighter, shifting in color from pale blue to a deep, unnatural green. It moves in a way that defies explanation, darting back and forth, hovering, then vanishing before reappearing somewhere else. Joe's heart pounds as the light suddenly stops moving, hovering directly above the village. It's blinding now, casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered huts. He raises his rifle, not sure what he's planning to do, but feeling the need to defend himself. The hum grows deafening, and Joe drops to his knees, covering his ears. The light pulses once, twice, then shoots upward into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. The hum fades, leaving only silence. OE sitting by a fire with the village elder, Kala, months earlier. Kala speaks in a low, solemn voice. "The sky holds many secrets," Kala says. "Sometimes it takes what it wants." Back in the present, Joe whispers to himself, "Is that what happened? Did the sky take them?" The mystery of Anjikuni Lake remains unsolved. Early morning, a few days later. The village is still eerily silent, but now there's a faint sound in the distance, the rhythmic crunch of boots in the snow. Joe Labelle stands at the edge of the village, his breath visible in the cold air, watching as a group of Royal Canadian mounted police officers approaches. The Mounties, dressed in their iconic red serge coats, move cautiously through the snow. Leading them is Sergeant James McLeod, a tall, stern man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor. Behind him are two younger officers, their eyes wide with curiosity and unease. "Sergeant McLeod," Joe says, his voice hoarse from days of little sleep. "I'm glad you're here." McLeod nods, his sharp eyes scanning the village. "Labelle," he says curtly. "You said there was trouble. What exactly are we dealing with?" Joe takes a deep breath, gesturing toward the huts. "The village, it's empty. Everyone's gone. Just vanished. And there's more. You need to see for yourself." One of the younger officers, Constable Harris, speaks up, his voice trembling slightly. Could it have been animals? Wolves, maybe? Joe shakes his head. No tracks. No signs of a struggle. And the graves, they're too precise. This wasn't animals. McLeod stands, his expression grim. We'll need to search the area. Harris, you and Thompson check the huts. Labelle, show me the lake. Cut to Joe and McLeod walking toward the lake, their boots crunching in the snow. The camera pans across the frozen landscape, emphasizing its vast emptiness. As they reach the shore, Joe points out the strange marks on the ice and the hole he discovered earlier. McLeod kneels down, examining the marks with a critical eye. These don't look natural, he says, his voice low. Almost like something was dragged across the ice. But what? Joe hesitates, then speaks. There's something else. The night after I found the village, I saw lights in the sky. Strange, moving lights. I've never seen anything like them. McLeod looks up, his brow furrowed. Lights? You mean the northern lights? Joe shakes his head. These were different. They moved in ways I can't explain. And when they were gone, the village stayed empty. McLeod stands, his expression unreadable. Lights in the sky won't hold up in a report, Labelle. We need facts, not folklore. Cut back to the village, where Harris and Thompson are finishing their search. They've found nothing. No clues, no evidence, no answers. The Mounties regroup in the center of the village, their breath visible in the cold air. McLeod addresses the group, his voice firm. We'll file a report, but without evidence, there's little we can do. We'll mark this as an unsolved disappearance and notify the regional authorities. For now, there's nothing more we can do here. As the Mounties prepare to leave, McLeod turns to Joe. You should come with us, Labelle. There's nothing more you can do here. Joe shakes his head. I'll stay a little longer. There's gotta be something I missed. McLeod nods, though his expression suggests he thinks Joe is wasting his time. Suit yourself, but don't inside one of the abandoned huts where Joe Labelle has set up a makeshift camp. A small fire crackles in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Joe sits on a wooden stool, staring at the flames, his face etched with exhaustion and frustration. A notebook lies open on his lap, filled with scribbled notes and sketches of the strange marks on the ice and the mysterious lights. Joe's mind races as he flips through the pages, trying to piece together what happened. He knows the Mounties won't take his story seriously, but he can't let it go. He starts talking to himself, voicing his thoughts aloud as if trying to make sense of them. He flips to a page in his notebook where he sketched the strange marks on the ice. These marks, they're too precise to be natural. And the hole in the ice, what could have caused that? Something came through, something big. But what? Joe shakes his head, flipping to another page where he's written notes about the lights in the sky. And those lights, they weren't the northern lights. They moved like they were alive, like they were searching for something. Joe leans back, running a hand through his hair. Aliens? Spirits? Some kind of government experiment? It sounds crazy, but what else explains this? Joe stands up, pacing the small space. Maybe the villagers saw something they couldn't explain. Maybe they tried to fight it or run from it. But why would they leave everything behind? And why take the bodies from the graves? He stops pacing, staring at the fire. There's got to be a logical explanation. There's got to be. Suddenly he hears a noise outside, a faint crunch in the snow. His head snaps up and he grabs his rifle, moving to the door. He peers outside, but the village is empty, the snow undisturbed. Joe steps outside, his breath visible in the cold air. He looks up at the sky, half expecting to see the lights again, but the stars are clear and still. What are you hiding? He whispers to the night fade to black as the screen reads, "The truth is out there, but will it ever be found?" A small, bustling trading post, several miles from Lake Anjikuni. Months have passed since Joe Labelle's discovery. The trading post is filled with trappers, traders, and locals, all gathered around a crackling fire, sharing stories and warming themselves against the cold. Joe sits at the edge of the group, his face weathered and his eyes distant. A young trapper, eager to impress, leans forward and says, "Did you hear about the village near Anjikuni Lake? They say the whole place just vanished overnight. People, dogs, even the bodies from the graves, gone." The young trapper persists, his voice rising with excitement. "It's true. I heard it from a Mountie. They found the village empty, food still on the tables, fires burning, but not a soul in sight. And they say there were strange lights in the sky that night." Another man, a seasoned trapper with a thick beard, speaks up. "I've heard stories like that before. The Inuit say the land has spirits. Sometimes they take people, especially if they've angered them. Maybe the villagers disturbed something they shouldn't have." A woman sitting nearby adds, her voice low and serious, "Or maybe it was something from the sky. My grandfather used to talk about lights that would come down and take people. He said they weren't from this world." All eyes turn to him. The young trapper's mouth hangs open. You saw it?" Joe nods, his gaze distant. "I found the village. Everything they're saying is true. The huts were empty, the food still on the fire, the dogs dead, and the graves were open, empty." The bearded trapper leans forward, his voice hushed. "What do you think happened, Joe?" Joe hesitates, then says, "I don't know. But whatever it wasn't natural. The lights, they weren't the northern lights. They moved like they were alive, and when they were gone, so were the villagers." The room falls silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. The camera lingers on the faces of the listeners, their imaginations running wild. The young trapper breaks the silence, his voice trembling with excitement. Do you think it was aliens?" Joe doesn't answer. He simply looks into the fire, his expression haunted. Cut to a wider shot of the trading post, showing the group huddled around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. The camera pulls back, revealing the vast frozen wilderness outside, dark and mysterious. Voiceover of a news reporter reading from a newspaper article. The mystery of Anjikuni Lake continues to baffle authorities. Reports of strange lights and an entire village vanishing have sparked speculation ranging from natural disasters to extraterrestrial encounters. The truth remains elusive. A documentary crew has traveled to the remote area near Lake Anjikuni. The landscape is still stark and frozen, though the village itself has long since been reclaimed by nature. The camera pans across the ruins of the huts, now little more than crumbling stone foundations and weathered wood. A narrator's voice fills the air, calm and measured, as the crew explores the site. Nearly a century has passed since the disappearance of the Inuit village near Lake Anjikuni. What happened here remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the North. Was it a natural disaster, a mass migration, or something far more inexplicable? This is all that's left of the village, the huts, the graves, the memories of the people who once lived here, gone. But the questions remain. What could have caused an entire community to vanish without a trace? Joe Labelle, the trapper who first discovered the abandoned village, spent the rest of his life searching for answers. He never found them. His accounts of strange lights and empty graves were dismissed by many as the ravings of a man driven mad by the wilderness. But others believe he saw something truly extraordinary. The camera shifts to an interview with an elderly Inuit man, his face lined with age and wisdom. He sits by a fire, speaking in a low, solemn voice. The land holds many secrets. My grandfather told me stories of the sky people, beings who would come down and take those who wandered too far from the path. He said they left no trace, only silence. Theories abound. Alien abductions, government experiments, even supernatural forces. But without concrete evidence, the mystery of Anjikuni Lake remains just that, a mystery. Joe Labelle described strange marks on the ice like something had been dragged across it. Some say it was evidence of a UFO. Others believe it was a natural phenomenon. But no one knows for sure. Some mysteries are never solved. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe some questions are meant to remain unanswered. A small, dimly lit cabin deep in the wilderness. The year is 1955, 25 years after the events at Anjikuni Lake. Joe Labelle, now an old man with a long white beard and weathered face, sits by a crackling fire. His cabin is filled with relics of his life, animal pelts, hunting gear, and a worn notebook filled with sketches and notes about the vanished village. A young boy, his grandson, sits at his feet, wide-eyed and eager. "Grandpa, tell me the story again. The one about the village that disappeared." Joe smiles faintly, his eyes distant as he stares into the flames. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.